Hello, my name is Noah Abji, and today we're going to learn how to multiply powers of 10 by decimals. So let's begin. So first, what are powers of 10? So they're basically just numbers such as 10, 100, or 1000. Numbers that start with 1 and end with lots of zeros, or start with lots of zeros and end with 1. But why are those powers of 10? Well, it's because if we raise 10 to different powers, which are exponents, which means we're multiplying that by itself a certain amount of times, we get these numbers. So 10 to the power of 1 is just itself. 10 to the power of 2 means 10 times itself, which is 10 times 10, and that's 100. And 10 to the power of 3 means 10 multiplied by itself 3 times total. So that's 10 times 10 times 10, which is 1,000. And if we keep going, we would get 10,000 and 100,000 and so on. And those are our powers of 10. So now let's talk about actually multiplying them. So how we multiply them by decimals? Well, let's start by reviewing how we multiply them by whole numbers. It's actually really easy. All we have to do is add a bunch of zeros. So specifically the amount of zeros that that power of 10 has. So if I'm multiplying 3 by 10, I look at the 10 and see it has 1 0, and then I just add a 0 to the 3 and we get 30. If I see that I'm multiplying 23 by 100, 100 is 2 zeros, so I add 2 zeros to 23, which gets me 2300 with 2 zeros at the end. And if I'm multiplying 15 by 1000, then I see 1000 has 3 zeros, so I add 3 zeros to the 15, which gets me 15,000. And here are the 3 zeros right here. Now, it works a little bit differently with decimals, because if we have a decimal and we just keep adding zeros, we don't actually change the value. For example, if we had the decimal 4.3 and we added a 0, we get 4.30. And if we add another 0, we get 4.300. But here's the thing. These decimals are all equal. Zeros at the end of decimals don't actually do anything. So 4.3 equals 4.30, which equals 4.300, which equals 4.30000, and so on. So we have to have a different rule for multiplying by decimals. Here's the rule. Instead of adding a bunch of zeros, we do what's called move the decimal point. And specifically, for each 0 that we would otherwise have added, we move the decimal point 1 space to the right for how many zeros there are. Let's look at some examples. So in these 3 examples, we're multiplying decimals by powers of 10, and we'll start with the one 4.3 times 10. So our rule says we're going to move the decimal point 1 right for how many zeros there are. So how many zeros are there? Well, 10 has 1 0, which means we're going to take this decimal point and move it 1 spot to the right. So instead of being 4.3, it's going to be 43 with a decimal at the end. But you don't actually need this decimal because it doesn't do anything in this case. So 4.3 times 10 is just 43. In this example, 0.352 multiplied by 100, 100 has 2 zeros. So we're going to move the decimal point 2 spots to the right. So it's going to go from here, 1 spot, 2 spots to the right to be after the 5. So instead of 0.352, and remember, we can drop the 0 now, it's just going to be 35.2 or 35.2. And for this last example, we're going to move the decimal point 3 spots to the right. So this decimal point, because 1000 has 3 zeros, will go 1 to the right, 2 to the right, and then we run into an issue. We can't move it another spot to the right. So let's remember, we've already done 2 of these zeros. We've already used them. If we move a 2 to the right, we get 918. And the decimal point is right here. But we still have another 0. Well, you can think of it this way. You move the decimal point 2 spots to the right, and you use 2 of the zeros in 1000. So now you have 918, and you need to use 1 more 0. So you can't move the decimal point anymore. So instead of moving the decimal point, you start adding zeros like you do as if you're normally multiplying a whole number by a power of 10. Because essentially, this turns into 918 times 10, because you use 2 of the zeros in 1000 and move the decimal points 2 spots to the right, and that's 9,180. All right, so now let's do a few review questions. 1 by 10, by 1,000, and by 100 being multiplied by decimals. So if you'd like to try these questions, I'll give you a few seconds to pause the video and then I'll explain the answers. All right, so here are the answers to these questions, and let's start on the first one. So the first one is 21.8 times 10. Now 10 has 1 0, so that means for each 0, we move the decimal point 1 spot to the right. Now since there's only 1 0, we move it 1 spot to the right, and that gets us 21, and then an 8, or 218, and the decimal point would be here, but at the end of the number it doesn't do anything, so it's just 218. For the second question, we have 34.15 times 100, or sorry, times 1,000. All right, so 1,000 has 3 zeros, so we want to move the decimal point 3 spots to the right. So move it 1 spot, 2 spots, and then we run into the problem. So again, we're going to do the same thing as last time. We're going to say, okay, we used 2 of these zeros, so we're going to cross them off to remind ourselves we have 1 left, and just do the problem from there. So if we move it 2 spots to the right, that gets us 3,415. And now we need to use another 0. This is 3,415 times 10. So we just add the last 0 on the end because we can't move the decimal point any longer. So we get 34,150. And finally, for the last question, 0.0009213 times 100. All right, remember for this one, we move the decimal point 2 spots to the right because 100 has 2 zeros. So if we do that here, we move 1, 2 spots, and we end up with 0. And remember, these zeros don't do anything if they're this way to the decimal point. So we can just start it with 0, and then we have 0.9213 as our final answer. That's all, and thank you for watching.